on campus and at the Newburgh facility as well. So I always like to say to any potential scholars in the audience, whether it's parents, students, we welcome any inquiries about the courses we teach in the department, and we run a full range of them from United States history through the history of Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, Asia. I'm responsible for the poli-sci courses primarily in our degree program, which is international relations. We offer an international studies degree. And I guess the proudest new offering would be Mandarin Chinese. In the last 2 years, for the first time, it's rare at a community college, a 2-year college, we've been offering Mandarin Chinese as credit courses for some degree of success, and then all the Romance languages as well. 2 other important things that we do, and maybe this will be of interest to you folks here tonight, in what I like to say is a small, but I'm sure an engaged audience. Really, thanks for coming out between the Mets and the Cubs and the Democratic debate and everything else. There's a lot that we're competing against and a lot going on. We also sponsor the international trips. I have had the pleasure to host trips in the last 10 years to the United Kingdom, to France, Normandy beaches, Austria, Germany, Spain, Morocco, Portugal. So we go to some pretty exotic places for a community college. And this spring break, March 18th through the 28th, we have a trip coming up to Eastern Europe. We will be visiting Prague in the Czech Republic. We'll be in Budapest, Hungary, Warsaw, Poland, and visiting Auschwitz as well. So a real exciting time, very competitively priced these trips. We welcome students, obviously they're credit-bearing experiences. We have many faculty and staff, but community members that go as well. Maybe you've never done the group thing. I never thought I'd he travels fastest who travels alone, but I've enjoyed doing those trips with our students and staff and community members. And the last thing we do are we program events like this tonight. The big programs we run are called Global Initiative, and those are college-wide events, usually focused around a theme. This year's theme is water, so we are exploring in the broadest way possible the biologic, the social, the cultural, the political effects of water here in the Hudson Valley and Orange County, and of course around the United States and ultimately the planet. So I'll plug an event we have tomorrow night. Professor Mark Strunsky, my dear friend from the Arts and Communication Department, is talking on water music. And Mark is going to compare the Impressionist painters, Monet in particular, and the influence that they subsequently had on the Impressionist composers, specifically Claude Debussy and Maurice Ravel. That'll be at 7 o'clock in the library in our Gilman International Center, and I saw a little bit of Mark's presentation, so he's got some great things. So we've done a number. The last couple weeks we've been focusing on religion. Peter Gottschalk came down from Wesleyan University to discuss the sacred Ganges River last week. Bob McMillan, who I had the pleasure of meeting, was a last civilian director of the Panama Canal Commission before the United States officially handed it over to the Panamanian people on December 31st, 1999. So if you check our global initiative calendar, there's just some very exciting things that we have going on. This past spring semester, I believe it was in early May, and we followed up in June, Dr. Richard Hull, who is a longtime resident of Orange County and a great friend of the college. I think Dick told me that he's finishing up extraordinary service at New York University as a historian there, 50 years, and he is retiring. At any rate, Professor Hull has a number of academic interests. One is his research recently into the Satmar community of Kiryas Joel here in Orange County in the Hudson Valley. So Dick asked for a forum to come and talk about the work that he's done on the Satmars. And while we were there, a number of us had the opportunity to meet Rabbi Joe Kolakowski. Joe made some interesting comments at that forum. talked about his perspective in Orthodox Jewish Hasidic history and culture, and then did what a lot of folks don't do, followed up. He came to my office, I guess it was a couple weeks later in July, and Joe said that he would like an opportunity to come back to the college to speak on, well, you can see the subject of the topic that he'll be speaking on tonight, getting to know the Hasidic community. What more can I say? It isn't on our lovely flyer, but I should say it, and then I'll hand it over. And Rabbi Joe Kolakowski has studied Hasidic and Orthodox Jewish communities throughout the world for over 15 years. He's taught at yeshivos in Kiryas Joel, Ramapo, and Sullivan County. Has served as a pulpit rabbi in synagogues from Richmond, Virginia to here in downstate New York. He's going to present a multimedia presentation examining perspectives on the history, sociology, religious culture of Hasidic and other Jewish communities in the Hudson Valley and greater New York area. We hope, that's what we talked about, that Joe is going to address Orthodox Judaism from a comparative religious perspective. And we'll do it like this. We'll have Rabbi Kolakowski do the presentation, and then afterwards we'll open it up for any brief, I would say brief, comments or questions that you, the members of the audience, have. So we're glad to have all of you here tonight at the college, and if you could please help me in welcoming Rabbi Joe Kolakowski. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, just I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Professor Basinski and the World Studies program here for allowing us to have this time. And I want to welcome everybody. As a man of faith, I do have to thank Almighty God for this opportunity as well, and I pray that I'll sanctify His name with this, even though we're in a secular setting here, maybe a little more so. When I say here we're getting to know, excuse me, the Hasidic community inside out, I don't mean to know everything there's about this. So much to learn about. It's a very rich culture with a lot to talk about. When I say inside out, I see me myself as an insider and an outsider a little bit. Excuse me, I didn't grow up in the Hasidic community. I don't actually reside in the Hasidic community, although I grew up in a home. My mother is Jewish. She grew up Orthodox. She kind of left. My father, he grew up Catholic, and they both met somewhere in the middle. And me and my sisters, we all found our own paths. And so I'm a little bit of an insider, a little bit of an outsider. I spent a lot of time in the community. My children go to day camp in the soccer community, and my daughter just started yesterday nursery school there. One of my daughters in a soccer-based school, more or less. So I guess I'm a little bit of an insider in those aspects as well, and we can discuss that more later. There's a classical text of sociology. Yeah, maybe it might be easier.
Thanks, Doug.
That 1956, Horace Minor wrote The Body Ritual Among the Nakirema. I remember, I think I was in 3rd or 4th grade when this text was introduced to us in school. It wasn't a Jewish school, it was a public school. And in this book, in this essay that he writes, he talks about these strange people, the Nakirema. You know, with all due respect to Professor Holm, when he came here, he said, oh, when you walk into Kiryas Joel, it's like you walk into another planet. It's so different. In The Body Ritual Among the Nakirema, Minor talks about all different aspects of personal hygiene among these strange people, the Nakirema. He says the hierarchy of magical practitioners, the medicine men in the prestige, the holy mouth men, and so forth. He says, "We report to me the ritual consists of inserting a small bundle of hog hairs into the mouth, along with certain magical powders, and moving the bundle in a highly formalized series of gestures." It's a strange group, the Nakirema. And furthermore, they go to this magic holy mouth men once or twice a year and are subject to all kinds of pain and suffering by virtue of having to endure this ritual that the Nakirema people endure, having all kinds of strange items being placed into their mouths by this holy mouth man. Of course, Nakirema is American backwards. And so things that we, anything can be described, depending how you spin it and how you describe it, you describe, this is this type of all kinds of weird things. So when you talk about a community that doesn't have television, doesn't have all kinds of things, it seems so foreign to the normal American, average American member of society. But the fact is that all of these things, for example, Professor Hull mentioned all kinds of things that are so different that the Orthodox Jewish community in general practices, not particularly the Hasidic community, like the Sabbath and kosher laws. And within the Orthodox community, there's a great deal of diversity. You have the modern Orthodox community, you have the Lithuanian community, you have the various Hasidic communities and the Sephardic communities. We have here the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Jack Lew, is an Orthodox Jew. He's not Hasidic, he's modern Orthodox, but he keeps the Sabbath and kosher and so forth. Former U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman, also a Sabbath-observant Jew. Maya Bialik, an actress, Sabbath-observant Jewish. Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump's daughter, converted to Judaism in 2009. Here you see her with her husband carrying items to celebrate the holiday of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles that we just finished about a week ago. Even, that's in the modern Orthodox world, even in the Hasidic world. Stephen Hill is an actor. He's retired now. He was in the 1960s. He was on the television show Mission Impossible for the first season, and after the first season, he was replaced by Peter Graves, who passed away earlier this year. And well, why didn't Stephen Hill leave Mission Impossible? Later on, he was on the lower picture. You see, he's in Law and Order. So why did he leave after that year? The story that I've heard going through around in the community was that there was one episode of Mission Impossible was supposed to take place in Israel. And they didn't have any stock footage from Israel. So they asked if they could come to New Square and take some films, stock footage, to use for their program. They were turned down, but Mr. Hill, himself Jewish and his wife was Jewish, he brought his two sons, and they decided they were going to go and teach his children about what it was like in the old country, and he brought along, even though he's an actor, he brought along a camera. The story I heard from people who were there, a friend of mine who was a young boy at the time living in the square, he said that his car had broken down, and it was one of the holidays at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, which means it's Torah, and so no one was going to help him until after the holiday to fix his car. And he walked into the synagogue with his camera, and he saw the previous Square Rebbe dancing with the Torah, which is the custom on the last 2 days of Tabernacles, particularly in most places only the last day, but in the Hasidic communities both days. And he said the Rebbe looked him up and down, and Mr. Hill said, "That's it, I'm staying here." He said he felt electricity come through his body when the Rebbe looked at him. And he joined the community. His wife didn't like it too much, and she left with the kids. However, here you see, it's a picture I took myself, his grandson's wedding. You can't see so well, his grandson and his son and Stephen Hill at their wedding, at the grandson's wedding in New Square. I used to eat in his son's house in Jerusalem when I studied there. And here you see he was accepted into the community. Later on, he went back to acting with the Rebbe's blessing. Now he's retired, and so here you have him at his. No, that's the wrong thing. That's not what I meant to press. So at his. Oh, I really messed everything up, didn't I? At his grandson's bar mitzvah, he remarried, and so his from his second wife, their family. It's interesting. His son, who his mother took away, he became Hasidic, and now he's not working. But then he remarried his grandson from his second wife, and he grew his beard in now that he was retired from Law and Order. He also, in this picture is not, but he also wears on the Sabbath a long Hasidic coat as well. Other people of the Hasidic world, Matisyahu is a reggae singer. He didn't grow up in the Hasidic world. He dabbled in it for a while. He left, he came in, he came out, but is still proudly Jewish. Shmuel Goteah from Lubavitch community here, he's with Michael Jackson. But not only newcomers, but also even from what we call the Hamisher community, the people who grew up in the Hasidic community. Here's Mr. Shlomo Baum from Curious Joel, New York. He had a startup tech company which he sold to Microsoft for $39 million. Here, and people will say, well, that's a man, what about the women? Here's a woman from the Satmar community, is what I've heard. She lives in Borough Park. Her name's Chani Newberger. She's the chief risk officer at the NSA. And on the NPR, they wrote about her, and she insists that her religious practices can actually be helping in dealing with workplace challenges, the discipline and rigor, the restrictions on what one can eat, and the restrictions on how one behaves. Hope that brings in values, living true to one's values, trying to bring that into approach your job each day, how you interact with people every single day. And so the author of that article on NPR says that Mrs. Newberger's point was that her professional achievements have not come in spite of her faith, but they've come because of it. Here's Ruchi Fryer, is a lawyer, grew up in the Hasidic community, is still part of the Hasidic community, never left the community. She lives in Borough Park. Her family are Baba for Hasidim, and she has an office in Brooklyn as well as in Monroe. We see her office in Monroe, and also speaking at a presentation a few years ago in Monroe, explaining, doing the same thing what I'm doing tonight, basically. So, all these claims that women are somehow held down, it's quite the opposite. In many cases in the Hasidic community, particularly, the women are the breadwinners, they're the more educated ones, they're the ones who are really in charge. My wife always says the men are just there for show. She doesn't, and even, this may be a little controversial, but even a Hasidic woman could be a rabbi in a sense. This is well over 100 years ago. She was the maiden of Ludmir, and she was considered to be a Hasidic Rebbe, to be a leader of a Hasidic community. A woman never married, or she was married briefly according to some accounts, and was revered as a Hasidic Rebbe, eventually moved to the Holy Land, where she's buried, and had the community there as well. And even people who are not part of the community might observe some of the practices here. We can see Bob Dylan in Jerusalem praying with the tefillin and the talis. The tefillin are boxes which contain scriptural passages from Exodus and Deuteronomy, specific passages handwritten on parchment, placed in leather boxes, leather straps attached to the arm and the head, often called phylacteries, coming from the Greek that you'll find, I think in the book of Acts it describes that, in other books of the New Testament, that term phylacteries appears. And also the talis, which has the fringed garments. I've heard stories of not only Bob Dylan, I know Jason Alexander for a while dabbled in this. Harry Houdini, every day I read an article, put on the tefillin, and even something which is not really practiced, even if he stayed in a hotel, he kept a mezuzah with him and put it up on the door, which is not a practice that I know any Orthodox Jew does. It's well above and beyond the call of duty. So, we have this, all these things in this community. I was a prison chaplain when I was a rabbi in Virginia, and there was unfortunately someone from the Hasidic community there, and in his defense and his trial, he said, you shouldn't think I'm so foreign. I wear white socks and knickers as George Washington did, but there's really more of a similarity of these communities to the founders than just white socks and knickers and long frock coats. Powdered wigs we didn't take, but I think, in a certain sense, the question is, when dealing with the questions of the Hasidic community is, well, how do they view America, and particularly something that's very valued in the Hasidic community, and we see here, different discussions, And this is a community that's not a proselytizing community. It's not seeking to impose their ways on anybody else, but rather seeking to live and let live. And this is really, something that's seen, as a source of pride in the Hasidic community. I wanted to talk about different ideas. Professor Basinski suggested that we should discuss various, he said myths. I don't want to pontificate. I'm not here to say that my way is necessarily right. And so I'm not here to really correct myths but rather discuss perceptions that we found, particularly on the internet. For example, there was it's a few places on the internet that a whole polemic against Orthodox Judaism, against the Talmud. And so here you have two rabbis from very different Orthodox worlds. The outsider, they would seem very similar. To someone on the inside, they're very different. And here they're celebrating the marriage of their children. These were both rabbis in Boston. This was from the modern Orthodox world, was Rabbi Soloveitchik, who came from a big dynasty of Lithuanian non-Hasidic rabbis. And here is the wedding of his daughter to a Hasidic Rebbe in Boston as well. Although it's interesting, this particular Rebbe, his son, Isidore Tversky, who succeeded Rabbi Meshulam Tversky as the Talmud Rebbe of Boston, was also a professor, I believe, in Harvard. I bring this up because there's an accusation that comes up on the internet, for example, talking in general about the Talmud, and really in this forum, I don't think it's something that's really such an issue in this community. It's something that people really care about much. But for example, there's on the internet, it goes a long polemic against the Talmud, and it would say, oh look, it quotes from the New York Times, the obituary of Rabbi Soloveitchik would say, oh, he's from a long line of Talmudic scholars and professor of Talmud, author of the volume of Talmud, and that's from the New York Times. And the author of this polemic says nowhere does Goldman, who wrote the article in the Times, refer to Rabbi Soloveitchik's knowledge of the Bible as a basis of being leading authority in Jewish law. And it's really a specious argument to begin with, because the Talmud is based on the Bible. You can't find barely a page of the Talmud that doesn't quote the Bible. It's a commentary on the Bible, essentially. The belief in general among Orthodox Jews is that when God gave the Torah to Moses, he explained it as well, and that's the oral tradition which was eventually recorded in the Talmud. These polemics particularly say that the Orthodox Jews place the Talmud above the Bible, and a pious Christian would probably find that offensive. Now, whether that's true or not is difficult to say, but I wanted to present certain aspects of the respect that the Jews have for the Bible, Orthodox and Hasidic Jews. And incidentally, in these pictures, it's interesting that you see the interaction of the Hasidic community with the non-Hasidic community. This was an event that I attended. That's actually me over there behind the Rebbe's hand. That's the Rebbe of New Square, who came to Queens to celebrate the giving of the new Torah scroll, which contains the first 5 books of the Bible, handwritten on parchment. It's a big party, a big celebration, almost like a wedding. And interestingly, a Hasidic rabbi coming to a non-Hasidic school to celebrate this. So too, here we have the Satmar Rebbe from Kiryas Joel shaking hands with the Chabad rabbi from Monroe, outside of Kiryas Joel, writing a letter in their Torah, which is part of the ceremony of the new Torah. These are two communities that for a long time were fighting, and here they are shaking hands. And here's his brother, the Satmar Rebbe from the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, celebrating a new Torah. And just as we celebrate, there's also mourning if the Torah is destroyed. This was after Hurricane Sandy. Many Torah scrolls were destroyed, and the community came out all together, Hasidic and non-Hasidic alike. Even people came from, this was in Far Rockaway, people came from Brooklyn and other places to mourn together here in Bnei Brak, which is a town near Tel Aviv in the land of Israel, an overwhelmingly ultra-Orthodox community, both Hasidic and non-Hasidic, mourning the destruction of the Torah, of several Torah scrolls that were destroyed, damaged in a fire, damaged beyond repair, and a funeral was set for these scrolls. For volume of the Talmud, it wouldn't be not the celebration and not the mourning. So for sure, in that sense, the Bible would trump the Talmud. On the other hand, the argument could be made, on the other hand, well, where does the Jew learn his, the pious Jew, the religious Jew, where does he learn how to his faith? He doesn't just open the Bible, although he'll find a source for everything he does in the Bible, but how exactly to do it? I mean, we had before, for example, the tefillin. It says in the Bible you should bind it as a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes, and yet doesn't say anything about they should be black boxes and made of leather and parchment and so forth. And yet, this is something that, according to, I would say just about every Orthodox Jew, was passed as a direct tradition from Moses, that this is the way to fulfill those passages of Deuteronomy and Exodus. Similarly, the mezuzah on the door and so forth. So that's addressed, so you have both sides. So I guess in that sense, the oral tradition would trump the written word, because otherwise, how would you know how to accomplish these things? And these traditions have been passed on for years. A little closer to home is a claim that I've seen repeated many, many times throughout the internet, and one source I saw was already from 2006, is that the Hasidic community don't get married legally. Now, I myself, one of my many hats that I wear is as a wedding minister, and I have, in addition to signing marriage license and performing ceremonies for 400 couples of all different religions or none at all, I have also signed marriage license for Hasidic community, for Hasidic couples. Here, there's Elaine Freeman, who's an editor of the Humanist Network News. She says that similarly to the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is a break-off of the Mormon Church, which still practices polygamy, mainstream Salt Lake City Church does not. So she said many couples do not marry civilly, so that some mothers can claim to be single parents and receive government benefits. This has been repeated many times on the internet. I can show you, all over the internet this claim. It's a very famous claim. I'm sure many of you might have heard this as well. I was asked about it today. And like I said, I myself, I've signed marriage licenses for Hasidic couples, and really, even we have from the Photo News in 2011 that the town of Monroe said they couldn't even handle the sheer number of marriage licenses that come from Curious Joel. So it's, it's clearly documented. It's just the opposite, that in the town of Monroe, where the Curious Joel is a little under half of the population, 75% of the marriage licenses come from Curious Joel, to the point where the clerk, Ms. Mary Ellen Beams, said she couldn't handle it anymore, and she deputized Gedalia Sedgin to be a deputy to also administer marriage licenses to the couples there. Just out of virtue, there was no space in the town hall, they couldn't manage it, so to give over that high number of marriage licenses they couldn't handle to someone else who legally and duly was permitted to be deputized in that fashion. And they're very serious about that. I mean, I'll tell you though, perhaps, there's all these theories. Where do these ideas come from? There's the old famous myth, I don't even want to mention it, the hole in the sheet. And some people say, maybe some from the Jewish community opine that perhaps it came from the fact that maybe someone saw the fringed garment hanging that we wear, the Hasidic Jews maybe wear on top of the shirt, others might wear under the shirt, which is kind of like a small poncho. It has the fringes mentioned in the Book of Numbers, also mentioned in Deuteronomy on the four corners, and also has a big hole in the middle for the sake of putting your head through it. To wear it in a similar sense like a poncho, and some people opine maybe that's where that theory, I'm not going to get into it if you didn't hear about it, might have come from. In a similar way, perhaps we could theorize that this idea came from the fact that Hasidic couples don't see each other before their marriage. They see each other before the marriage, but from the engagement on, they'll meet a few times, 2 or 3 times. and decide, they'll have their friends and relatives, and matchmakers fix them up, but it's not an arranged marriage by any sense, it's an arranged meeting. All right, the number of meetings within the Hasidic community are less than other Orthodox communities, and it's generally in the home, chaperoned. In other communities, they might go out on dates to restaurants, and they might do more meetings. And in those communities, they might only not see each other as a tradition for the last week before the wedding. This digitally exists in American society as well as, there's the old custom not to see the bride on the wedding day before the ceremony and so forth, which exists in Western society as well. So occasionally the couple might get the marriage license the day after the wedding, or I've heard where I live in Sullivan County, we have a big summer community of Hasidic Jews who occasionally will get the marriage license well before the ceremony and have essentially a civil marriage with myself or the senior rabbi in our community, and I've often signed as witness to essentially civil marriages well before, maybe it could be a few months before the actual ceremony, which incidentally I've seen myself as a wedding minister for people of other religions as well. It's not that uncommon in general. When I lived in Virginia, quite often folks wanted to have the marriage licenses signed a year or two before wedding so they could get military housing or something. And I was always happy, particularly if someone in the military, of course I wanted to oblige to help out and so forth. So it's not that strange, but essentially though, also that's a theory. You could theorize, maybe that's where this idea came from, but I wouldn't know how many folks who claim this have ever been to a Hasidic wedding to see, and even if you're at a wedding of any kind, I don't know when do you see the minister signing or the justice of peace or whoever is officiating the marriage license. It's not something that necessarily you'll see when you go to the wedding. So I'm not sure where this came from, but the fact of the matter is, clearly it's just the opposite, at least for sure. In Curious Joel, we see this was in the photo news, that the clerk said 75% of the marriage licenses in Monroe Town Hall have come from Curious Joel, and you could check up that as well. Some people want to know, what do Hasidic Jews in general think of other religions? Now, Hasidism, as a movement in Judaism, it originated with the Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov. Professor Hull discussed this when he was here as well. He was a charismatic rabbi, charismatic in the same sense, as we'll get to later when we get to the aspects of comparative religion, in the same sense as the Pentecostal and holiness movements and other charismatic movements in the Christian world, particularly in American Christianity, have developed. The Baal Shem Tov respect for other religions, and this continues into the Hasidic world today. This is a story that's often repeated in the Hasidic world, that when the Baal Shem Tov, if he had a driver who was not Jewish, I've driven around in Poland and Ukraine. In Ukraine, not as much. In Poland, you see it more. I'm assuming 300 years ago was much more than is now in Poland. You'll often see crucifixes along the road, much more than you'll see in America. In America, you'll probably only see it if, God forbid, there was an accident in that place or something in general. In Poland, it's much more obvious when you go on the roads. And he had a non-Jewish wagon driver who would always make the sign of the cross, as is customary in the Catholic faith, when he saw a crucifix. And when he had a wagon driver who did not make the sign of the cross, he was very nervous. Could he trust this man? He's not a man of God, not a man of faith. On the other side,
can you just tell me if the Baal Shem Tov respected other Jews?
Absolutely. That was his main view, was that the simple Jew, who was not a scholar, maybe not even so religious, maybe made a lot of mistakes, if his heart was sincere in devotion to God, that was in many ways more holy than the great scholar who does everything right. You know.
So you would say that Hasidim accept all religion and all belief, even if it does not subscribe to their thought process.
Respect in the sense that even if it's not, they'll be separate from it, certainly, in general. But respect in the sense that this could be a path to God, and this even has a biblical source to it.
So they wouldn't talk badly about other Jews and say disparaging remarks about them because they were God's children, right?
Well, it depends, because there's a difference between a sincere ignoramus and a wanton heretic, but even the wanton heretic or the wanton sinner, even the Rabbi Berdichev, he was before Yom Kippur, and it says in the Talmud that if someone repents out of love for God, all of their previous sins, if they truly, sincerely repent, motivated out of love of God, their previous sins could be turned into merits, as if they did good deeds. So he said to one fellow who was known in the community as a pretty bad guy, he said, "I'm so jealous of you. Look at the opportunity you have. Now is the time to repent. And you can turn all those sins into good deeds." He said, "Don't worry, Reb, next you'll have more to be jealous of me for." It works both ways. Our rabbi in our community, he said that his cousin was religious, and he worked in a department store in Chicago in the old days, and the owner of the store wasn't Jewish, so he came in on Yom Kippur, similar to the story the Baal Shem Tov didn't trust the driver, didn't cross himself. The owner of the store, who saw this Jewish fellow coming in on Yom Kippur, was not a Jewish owner. He said, "What are you doing here? This is your holiest day." He said, "Well, I'm not religious. I'm not that religious." He said, "You're not religious, you're not a man altogether. How could I trust you to take care of the stock in my store? If at least one day a year you don't devote something to your faith." There was a story, one of the leading, in current times, one of the leading Lithuanian rabbis in Jerusalem. He was asked whether a young woman who died young and had seemingly left the faith altogether, if she could be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And he asked, well, where was she on Yom Kippur? And the story came back that she came to the synagogue for 20 minutes. And he said, oh, so we see there that she had something in her, and he permitted her to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And this goes even more. A major aspect of the Satmar theology is that the Jews are in exile. We're an exiled people. The Satmar community is primarily a very strong anti-Zionist community. And that anti-Zionism extends beyond just the state of Israel, but in a general worldview of being an exiled people. So there's a story that here's Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum and his secretary, Rabbi Ashkenazi, and they were walking down the road, and I don't know if it was Rabbi Ashkenazi or another secretary, asked a young man who was not Jewish to step out of the way to let the Rebbe through. And the Rebbe said, why did you do this? It's his street, it's not ours. We're an exiled people. We have to have respect for our non-Jewish neighbors and not and not in any way be in a position, I have to get out of the way for him, as the Rebbe is saying, not him get out of the way for me. I don't want to get too much into the annexation debate, but it's a debate within the Hasidic community itself that's centered really on this idea of not offending the neighbors. And within Kiryas Joel itself, there are two sides of the annexation debate. Those who are pro-annexation would, like Robert Frost, although I'm saying ironically that wasn't the point of his poem, will say good fences make good neighbors. They see what's going on in East Ramapo and the kind of upset that is going on, how the Orthodox community has overtaken the school district there, based on a founding. I'm not putting that down. It's based on a founding American principle of no taxation without representation, and so they feel, why should they be taxed for something they're not, or many different reasons. And in the end, now in East Ramapo, things have really turned around. There have been budgets passed and so forth. But the major, particularly of the Satmar community, although other Hasidic communities as well, is that we have to be respectful of our non-Jewish neighbors, and that's the same issues in Israel and in other countries. And so the view of, let's say, the pro-annexation side is to avoid what happened in East Ramapo. Not that that's necessarily anything wrong with that, but you can see that it's caused a lot of problems. And so by avoiding that, whether it just happened that way, incidentally with other issues as far as the school district in Kiryas Joel, how Kiryas Joel has its own school district, and so therefore they're not taxed by Monroe Woodbury School District, and they can't vote in Monroe Woodbury School District, and similarly with other things. The anti-annexation side, which there is a large faction within Kiryas Joel that's against the annexation, as far as a theological view, is simply our neighbors don't want it, we can't do it, it violates our religion. In a way, maybe you could say one sees the immediate, one sees the future. Now, in general, these two sides, there were really three major factions in Kiryas Joel. There are those who are loyal to the Rebbe who lives there, Rabbi Aaron. There are those who are loyal to his brother in Williamsburg, which is a smaller group in Kiryas Joel, and a group that's probably bigger than the group that follows Rabbi Zalman in Brooklyn, are the group that did not accept any new Rebbe. Actually, they, for a long time, again, going back to, we showed a Hasidic woman who was a Rebbe, they followed the Rebbe's widow, the Rebbitzin, as essentially their Rebbe. This group, that group tends to be more religiously conservative, interestingly, in many ways. They, and actually, from within that group, there are those who, I saw this, they printed this recently, that they feel that the Jewish people are not supposed to vote because we're in exile. We should just stay out of politics altogether. The group that opposes annexation also very vocally opposes the Kiryas Joel School District for sure. That's a major thing they oppose. They see it as heretical and an affront to Judaism, and they oppose the existence of the village as well. Also, they feel that the current Rebbe in Kiryas Joel, he's not extreme enough. His wife comes from Israel. The Satmar community opposes speaking modern Hebrew, so because his wife grew up in Israel speaking, learning modern Hebrew in the schools where she attended, which I'm not quite so sure if that's even true, that she did learn modern Hebrew in those schools, considering who her father was and so forth. But also he's seen as not, only non-Zionists as opposed to anti-Zionists and so forth, and so therefore, by virtue of being a son-in-law of this rabbi, he's not good enough to be the Rebbe and so forth. These are kind of the opposition from within the community, but also there's more to that. I don't want to get too much into the annexation of Kiryas Joel, but the fact of the matter is that annexations always are only voted on by the people who live on that land. They're not voted on by the people who live in surrounding land. If there's empty land that wants to be annexed, that land could be annexed without any referendum if nobody lives there. And it's coming up a referendum, and the general public in Kiryas Joel cannot vote there, and the general public in Monroe cannot vote. Only the people on those 164 acres have the right to vote in that referendum, and I don't know really how many of those folks want the annexation. If it means more building, more high-density housing, a lot of those folks moved to that area specifically because they wanted the convenience of being close to Kiryas Joel with the synagogues and the food and everything, but they didn't necessarily want to live one on top of the other. They wanted a more spread out life. So when it really comes down to the people who live there, there is a high number of the dissident group that lives in that area as far as I know. I've taught in schools from both sides. I taught I taught elementary school in the main school, and by the way, I got a regular tax form and everything was, all the taxes were taken out and everything was regular. It wasn't under the table or off the books. It was totally the way it's supposed to be. In case, a lot of folks might imagine it's otherwise there. And I also taught in a school that is not officially with the dissidents, but a small school, a high school for boys who really were not fitting in the Hasidic community. And actually there I taught a GED course to try to help them at the behest of the rabbi of that yeshiva, that they should be able to live in general society a little bit easier as well, while still maintaining their Hasidic culture. So I really don't know how it's going to go when it comes, and I really don't have a horse in the game. The main thing I'm concerned about is it should be fair. The way it goes is that the folks who live in a place get to vote, and as long as they have the right to vote, I'm happy whatever way it comes out. But I can see the points that both sides have within the community. And now here we see Professor Berger. He wrote a book. He talks the worlds of the Hasidim, their battles with America. The question is, well, Frank Sinatra asked, what is America to me? This is a land, a map or a flag I see. Well, he didn't write the song, but and really, what is America? Is it Coca-Cola or is it the Constitution? I would feel that essentially the Hasidic community embraces very strongly the freedoms, the Bill of Rights, the ideals of the founding of America being a country that was founded by folks who came from other countries seeking religious freedom, seeking to live their lives, but they're not the Coca-Cola crowd. They're not looking for the culture of America. They're looking for the ideals, the founding ideals of America, to embrace those ideals. But they don't have anything against other people who do differently, which I'm going to get into later. But this is for them. They want to live their lives, but they're not looking to impose. They don't send out, like the Lubavitch community sends out missionaries. They want everyone to be Lubavitch. They even send missionaries to the Satmar community. The Satmar community doesn't send out missionaries. It doesn't bother them that someone else is reform or conservative or this and that, as long as they're not speaking in their name. And that's really the major issue, for example, with Israel and so forth, is that, not in my name. Don't, call it a Jewish state. Don't impose your ways on us. When the Satmar community came to America, the established Jewish community was involved, like Jewish Federation and other establishment organizations, was involved in allotments for different things for schools and so forth. And they started to put pressure on the Satmar community. So, do your children know the Israeli national anthem, and do they learn modern Hebrew, and they learn Israeli history, and so forth. So the Satmar Rebbe said, you know what, we live in a free country. We don't need to go through the Jewish Federation. We'll make our own organizations, and that's what he did. Not knowing anything about it, but he was very successful in it. More successful, while all the Jewish Federation groups are struggling to maintain Jewish identity and continuity and so forth. That's not something that's really on the table in the Satmar community.
Should you explain why though? Why that is? Because there's no inspiration of any other thought process in the Satmar community. It is distinctly and completely what you learn in Satmar is what you learn. If you don't learn, you don't have access to newspapers other than Satmar, or any television, anything.
Well, anybody can on their own decide if they want a television or not. I know people who are not Jewish who don't want a television, and I know people in the Satmar community and I know people in the Satmar community, even though it's dictated to them, I know there's people in the Satmar community, even if it's dictated to them, they don't follow it, so because they know it's not an essential aspect of the religion, like keeping the Sabbath or kosher or so forth. So people think on their own. They decide, and really the Satmar community, different than other Hasidic communities in general, which is something I want to get into, is a much more a democratic community. I was going to get into that later, but I saw on another idea. There was an interview with Rabbi Leibowitz from Woodridge, who's a big scholar, very respected, a little bit of controversial figure. he has his own personality and everything, and they were interviewing him before the Yortzeit of the Satmar Rebbe, and in the interview they asked, well, what would the old Satmar Rebbe, who he was a student of, say about and so forth? He said, why are you asking me that? He said, the Rebbe would say, what does the Torah say? Not what do I say. He wasn't involved in saying, just because I say so, this is how it is. He encouraged to study all the different Jewish works, whereas, let's say, New Square, not that I'm putting them down for that, New Square, you're not supposed to study from this Hasidic group or that one, or this text is forbidden. Classical religious Jewish text, there's one commentary on the Code of Jewish Law from a Lithuanian rabbi who fought against the Square Rebbe's great-grandfather, and so they don't study that, even though it's a basic text for high-level scholars. And one time the Satmar Rebbe was sitting with the Square Rebbe, and he quoted from that text, which is a legal text, commentary on Jewish law, and the Square Rebbe said, oh, you study this? He said, yeah, because I had a question in Jewish law, and I looked through the Bible commentary of your grandfather, which is a Hasidic commentary, mystical commentary, and I didn't find the answer to this question as far as whether a food is kosher or not, if something fell in, but then I opened this book and it's right there. Not that he was insulting that book, which is respected, but it was just, he had a sense of humor. The Satmar Rebbe had a very, very strong sense of humor. Some people question if that's an authentic story, and it might not be. Friends of mine, they were upset when they heard that because they said that he wouldn't be so disrespectful to say that. But that's what America is all about. You have the Amish, you have all different groups that decide to separate from America, and that's what freedom of religion is about. We said before, freedom of religion is every religion. It's and they're not seeking to impose this on anyone else. It's strictly a live and let live society. And also a lot of what we consider American culture comes from the Jewish community that has abandoned the faith. There was a whole documentary on A&E many years ago made by Jewish people about how all of Hollywood was made by people of Jewish background. Here's a popular secular Jewish magazine says the Jews run Hollywood, so what? Saying there's nothing wrong with it. And Neil Gabler, I think, is maybe a little bit more radical. He says how the Jews invented Hollywood, which I find offensive. There happens to be a lot of Jewish people in Hollywood, doesn't mean anything, or certainly in the founding of Hollywood, much higher percentage than all the major, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and Fox and Warner Brothers were all Jewish boys who were born not too far from each other in Eastern Europe, the Pale of Settlement. This term, the Jews, I find a little bit more offensive because it's kind of saying that the Jewish community is one big homogenized community. But it's the culture, they don't have anything to do with it, but there is a great deal of patriotism. They don't have anything to do with Israel. Here there was a rally in Manhattan in Foley Square against the Israeli draft. Here we have a non-Hasidic rabbi speaking. This is the dean of the South Waldberg Yeshiva, Rabbi Wachsvogel. I also taught there in the elementary school, speaking, and down below we have, there's Rabbi Wachsvogel in there, there's the Satmar Rebbe, the Balaber and Pupa, and different, and he's the Satmar Rebbe's brother and his son and his brother-in-law and the chief rabbinical judge of Kiryas, all different rabbis. But the American flag is very prominent, and the Israeli flag is not something you'll see. Here's another Satmar anti-Israel protest. This is America's land of freedom of religion, and Israel is a war against religion.
Then why are there very many Hasidim in the Israeli Congress?
Okay, so there are.
It's not actually overwhelmingly.
Well, it's not overwhelmingly at all. It's a small minority, but those are from other Hasidic communities. Those are from. There's the Hasidic community has the Satmar community, which is anti-Zionist, and the other communities in general are non-Zionist, which means.
But they're living in Israel.
Well, the Satmar community also, there are anti-Zionists living in Israel too. They were there before 1948. They shouldn't be forced to leave just because.
I'm not saying that they should be forced to leave.
Yeah, just because.
Find it an inconsistency that people who don't believe in the state.
I mean, in 1947.
Live there and are part of the political process.
So the anti-Zionists don't vote in Israel. They don't accept any government grants. The Satmar communities and others like Brisk and Tolosar and all, these are small communities in Israel. They don't accept any government funding, no welfare in Israel. Wait a second, the Satmar community in Israel, the Satmar Tolosaran, they don't vote and they don't participate in the Israeli elections in the Knesset. The larger Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox communities, which are non-Zionists, do accept welfare, do vote, and do participate in the government, but they don't believe, as a matter of religious belief, that there should be a Jewish state. But since they're living there, they are participating in the government. So they might dress similarly, and they get along. But those groups do accept welfare in Israel, do vote, and so forth. The Satmar community does not, because they see the state of Israel as heretical. And although the non-Zionists also see it as heretical, but they don't. But they feel they're already. Well, they're there already. So in a sense, if they can keep the status quo and they're living in a democratic society, and they can defend their rights and so forth. Those communities, those ultra-Orthodox communities in Israel that do participate in the government, do not seek to impose religious laws as the laws in Israel. The modern Orthodox community, on the other hand, which their rabbis also dress with black hats and so forth, many of them, particularly the more right-wing among them, do seek to, whereas they hope to eventually become a religious state. That's the religious Zionist community. The non-Zionist community just want to live and let live. Although since there were certain status quo laws in the founding of the State of Israel vis-a-vis religion, they do seek to maintain the status quo. And so they join together with the Satmar community, for example, to fight against the draft, which was a status quo law that religious, just like in America, people who were learning in seminary for the clergy of any religion were exempt from the draft, and so too in Israel. It's not just Jewish seminary students, it's other religions too, have traditionally been exempt from the draft. There was a move to change that, and in that case, even some of the pro-Zionist, religious Zionists also joined together with the anti-Zionists and non-Zionists to oppose that, whereas others disagreed, and they have all different views. So too, here he says, I'm an American Jew, and Bibi Netanyahu in the state did not speak for us, showing that, it's not a religious thing, it's Bibi Netanyahu's chutzpah, and that, the point he's trying to make is that the Satmar community are loyal Americans, they don't have dual loyalties, they're not beholden to another country, their concerns are what happens here. And here you have, it goes back to the old days, the old Satmar Rebbe sitting at a protest also against Israel, and next to him there's the old Rebbe, and next to him his successor, the previous Rebbe, and here it says, the foundation of human society is freedom of religion, and in Yiddish it says, all that we are asking for is true freedom to live a Torah life in the land of Israel. In general, the Satmar won't talk about Israel, they'll say the land of Israel, the Holy Land, because there is a religious devotion to the Holy Land, but will say that the religious devotion is, other religions also share religious devotion to that land, and it's not a monopoly that the Jewish people have. The Christians and Muslims and Baha'i and other religions also see this land as holy. The holiness that the Satmar will see in the land of Israel is really almost, it's not even so much a spiritual one, although there is a spiritual aspect to it discussed in the Hasidic text, but the Talmud says basically the holiness is that there are different laws that apply to that land, agricultural laws that the Bible discusses, tithing and the sabbatical laws that don't apply in other lands. And in general, the Hasidic community is, I would say, a libertarian one in that sense. Here is a rabbi from a very extreme anti-Zionist group and he was shaking hands with Ron Paul, a very vocal libertarian, to say, I'm not seeking to impose my religion on anyone else. I don't care that you eat ham. I don't care that you drive on the Sabbath. I just want to live my life. And this focus on America is very strong in the Satmar community. Here you have the Satmar Rebbe's grandson it's very interesting that here he is at a Holocaust Day memorial ceremony, which the Satmar community does not observe the Holocaust Day, the Israeli Holocaust Day that has become popular in many communities for many reasons, not the least of which is that the timing of it is in a month when we're not allowed to be mourning, not allowed to say eulogies even at a funeral, and that it should fall on that day. And the reason why that day was picked was because of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and since the Satmar community is a strictly nonviolent community vis-a-vis any nation that they're living in, that they would find that to be offensive. Still, they understand they're dealing, here's the Rabbi's grandson, he's going and speaking on an American military base, Fort Hamilton. He's saying there's no greater country than America. He told some stories of his great-grandfather in the Holocaust on a day that his community would not celebrate, but he understands that other communities do celebrate it, and if there's an opportunity to show a friendly face and reach out to other communities, and this was a group of Jews and non-Jews, of course, in the chapel of the fort, and the Rebbe coming and participating in this, the Rebbe's grandson participating in such an event, what you might think that it says, much more such a fact like that. Even he's standing in front of, at the podium, there's a Star of David, which the Satmar community does not have. They consider it, whether it's heathen or heretical. You will not find a Star of David in any Satmar synagogue. And yet here he is speaking at the podium with the Star of David because he understands he's not imposing his particular community's views on another community. Interestingly, he also arranged for his grandfather, the Rebbe, to meet with two Muslim billionaires from the United Arab Emirates who do a lot of business with the Hasidic community, members of, not the community in general, members of the Hasidic community, and they wanted to meet with the Rebbe to talk about the views of Zionism, and he was very happy to oblige. And similarly, the fact of the matter is, it's not a secret, the Satmar Rebbe has office hours every night from 8 o'clock to 10:30. Anyone of any religion could come in and speak to him. He speaks English, not as well as his brother in Brooklyn does. He also has office hours every night, his brother in Brooklyn as well. The one in Curiousville actually goes to Brooklyn one night a week. It's Tuesday that he goes into Brooklyn as well to make it easier for folks who live in the city. They don't have to use the Yiddish word, schlep up to Curiousville to see him if they want to meet with him. When this is extended to anyone, men or women, he might not look at them in the face or something, but he will talk and he will answer.